All right, everyone. I see the numbers are ticking up. I'm very excited to kick us off. So welcome everyone to our Getting Promoted to Senior Engineer panel. My name is Lupita. I am on the internal, whoa. Justin, we just got a loud noise from your microphone. I think it'd be best if everyone mutes until they're speaking. But yeah, excited to welcome everyone. Like I said, my name is Lupita. I am on the internal communications team at Twilio. And you know a little bit about myself. I will be moderating today's panel. So my background is in communications, but I've worn a lot of hats throughout my career. This panel will be focused more on the software engineering side of career development, but I'll be sharing my own thoughts here and there. And, you know, I'm a proud Mexicana, and I love being an advocate for other Latinx people within the tech space and beyond. And I'm really excited to be hosting this conversation here today because I think it's a really great opportunity for folks to just share their experiences and their journeys in their career development. So we are so excited for everyone to join us for Getting Promoted to Senior Engineer. And before we jump into the panel, I would love to explain a little bit more about what Twilio is and what we do. Twilio is a platform for digital engagement. We provide the building blocks to companies and developers to communicate with their clients and customers. So for example, you can use Twilio's APIs to build messaging apps such as texting a number and receiving information back. One of the examples I like to use is if you're using a rideshare app and you need to take a lift from somewhere. You order it, you get a message, a text message saying your ride is on the way. When your driver is outside, they call you and let you know. And then after your ride is done, you receive a receipt email. All of that technology is powered by Twilio. So that is just kind of an easy way to get your mind around what we do and who we are. And if you would like to know more about Twilio, just make sure you check out our website at twilio.com to learn more about what you can build. So now, without further ado, I would love to introduce some of my fellow Twilions. To get us started, let's start by introducing ourselves, your name, your role, team at Twilio, and please share one hobby that you like to do outside of the office. And I'll let Justin start us off.
Hi, Lupita. Thank you. My name is Justin Kitagawa, and I'm a Senior Director of Engineering at Twilio. I am Japuvian, so I am half Japanese, and my mother is Peruana. So I grew up in a very Latino house or Latinx household. In terms of my hobbies, I like to play guitar and play piano.
How fun. And have you started picking up any other instruments while you've been sheltering in place?
I have. And I recently purchased this drum machine here, and I've been kind of like fooling around playing on the drum machine and such.
So you're going to drop a beat at the end of this panel. Got it. Jamie, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Fuken. I am a Senior Software Engineer in the Account Security team, supporting the OT app and building products for verification. I am Colombiana. My hobby was going to the movies and doing exercise before this quarantine. But recently I adopted 2 beautiful dogs, so they are my hobby now.
What are your dogs' names?
Masmelo and Bella.
Masmuelo?
Masmelo is marshmallow.
Oh!
It's like marshmallow, but in Spanish.
Cute.
Yeah.
And Brendan?
My name is Brendan Villalobos. I'm Chicano, and I'm the tech lead for the machine learning team in Twilio's connected data products platform. And what was a hobby, I guess? I like to go surfing on the weekend.
Awesome. you're based out of Northern California, I think, right?
Yeah, it was pretty cold.
Oof.
I grew up in SoCal, and my friends try to come up and go surfing without a wetsuit, and it just doesn't happen up here like that.
No, that's not how the Bay Area rolls. Okay, so let's jump into our questions. Representation of Latinx folks in the tech industry is still quite low. Could you talk more about your career journey and how you found your way to Twilio? Brendan, can you kick us off with that one?
Yeah, sure thing. So I was a first generation college student who sort of stumbled into having a technical career. I started out being interested in law school, declared as a psychology major. I was so excited about the science, I started getting into research, and I found out to be a good researcher, it's good to have a deep understanding of statistics. And then I found out in order to do statistics effectively, especially in modern times, it's good to have a deep understanding of computation. So I found a really nice intersection of all those things with machine learning. And so since I started later than my peers, I didn't have the same sort of background and internships that they did after graduating college. So I actually started my career with a summer internship after I graduated college, and then used that as my only experience to leverage into my first software job. And then, keeping my eye on machine learning, I stayed vigilant of opportunities to angle from a software job into a machine learning specific a couple years later, and eventually picking up my master's along the way. And I've just been building my career ever since.
Nice. It sounds like you had kind of a different start than a lot of your peers, but then you still chose to go and get your master's. That's a really interesting, I think, trajectory, because I think some folks, when they get started, if they have like a non-traditional background or non-traditional start, they feel a little more stuck than their peers. So it's interesting to hear that you still kind of chose to go through a little bit of a traditional route.
Yeah, I don't necessarily recommend the master's route, honestly.
Oh,
yeah.
Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, the short of it is, even 5 or 6 years ago, the machine learning was a little harder to hire for, and people would not look at your resume if you didn't have a master's. And I think even now that's a lot less true. And it was a very expensive choice I made. And, it did help me, but I don't know if it's the only way to go about it.
Sure. I think as we move into a more digital world, it does become less of a requirement, because I think, at least from my perspective, and I'm not technical, so feel free to push me in the right direction if I'm wrong, but what I've observed is the traditional background does not hold as much weight as it once did, right? There are people breaking into software roles that don't have that traditional background and are able to move up the career ladder. It's just a little slower because you start off in a different kind of playing field. Yami, would you like to share your experience next?
Yes, so I have always loved math, so my career choice was engineering, but I decided which engineering to choose in my last year of high school. I was good at chemistry, so the right option was chemical engineering, but I saw a flow diagram and that changed my mind. So I chose systems engineering. I was accepted to the National University of Colombia, and I am one of the first in my family to attend college. I have been in the industry for 14 years. My first job was in a telecommunications company. Yeah, maybe it doesn't seem, yeah. There, I had the opportunity to learn how to code Android apps. After that, I worked for a financial company, building mobile apps for banks focused on the unbanked population. I was in a payments company. I helped to build an SDK to receive payments and build mobile apps for the clients. When I was there, I decided to explore new job opportunities, and I found the Twilio job post. I was intimidated because Twilio is a big company, but I decided to give it a try. The worst case would be to receive a no. But luckily, I was hired. I am very glad to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here as well. It's funny hearing that you your first job was telecommunications, and now it's kind of like full circle
Yeah.
to Twilio. And also, I love that even though you were a little nervous to approach the opportunity, since Twilio was such a big company, even though, you know, sometimes it feels really small in ways, you still did it and you took that risk. And there's a saying I like to say called it's you got to risk it to get the biscuit. So like you just kind of have to go for it. And like you said, the worst thing that could happen is you get a no.
Yeah.
So it's great that you took that leap of faith. And lastly, for this question, Justin, would you like to share your experience?
Absolutely. So I've been 20 years in kind of the technology space, right? And I did start kind of in a more traditional way. So I went to school and university, and I studied initially cognitive science. And at my university, cognitive science was a study of the brain, and it was like psychology, neurobiology, and computer science, or just artificial. And I was just really attracted kind of like the computation side of things. And so I ended up double majoring in cognitive science and computer science. But one thing that I think is important when, at least for my journey, is that instead of really kind of looking at it as like a career ladder and just kind of looking at it as just from software engineer things, like I view it almost as a career pyramid. And I've had a really kind of like eclectic, wide range of roles across technology. And so starting as a software engineer and then moving to a tech lead and a project lead and project manager, going to sales and being a sales engineer and learning how to kind of like sell, being a technical product manager. I had my own consulting firm for a bit of time, right? But I feel like that breadth of kind of knowledge of wearing different hats really helps me in my role right now, and just being an engineering leader, because anytime you kind of like move into a different team, there's just gaps, and being able to kind of like morph and fill in those gaps has been kind of like really beneficial for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really great approach of having kind of a lot of mastery. I don't know if that's the right word, but like being able to see a lot of different perspectives and get experience that is diverse. And it's funny, you mentioned like you started as cognitive science and then kind of moved into a more technical field. But I think what both of those have in common is that you want to know why things work the way that they do, and kind of take a look under the hood, which I think kind of is why you probably go for that pyramid approach. I think it makes sense, at least. Okay, so our next question is around transitioning. So what has been the hardest part while transitioning from mid to senior level? And I'll start with Brendan for this one.
Oh yeah, that's easy. Easily the hardest thing transitioning from a mid-level to a senior level would be being comfortable dealing with ambiguity. So the more junior you are, people try to say a lot of things about what a senior role even is, and I don't necessarily subscribe to all of them. But one thing that seems pretty consistent is that the more senior you are, the more responsibilities you have, and as a consequence of that, you have more ambiguous requirements coming in from the people above you. So whereas when you're more junior, you might have a very specific ticket that says, do this piece of code that does this thing with these acceptance criteria, you transition into those tickets, and then you transition into looking at the big project design and systems design that creates those the need to write those tickets, and then you look at the architecture and so on. And a lot of times it's not clear what the best way to go about is. You have to be able to make decisions under uncertainty.
And just to kind of do a follow-up on that, how do you approach that ambiguity?
You know, it's kind of, it's as much a creative process as it is a scientific process. Obviously, as a machine learning person, I'm pretty into data. So I like to make sure that I have some numbers behind the decisions that are made as much as I can. I don't know. Other than that, the best you can do is, I'm a big fan of eating an elephant one bite at a time. Although, actually, we shouldn't be eating elephants. I need a better metaphor. But, really, I mean, you just take it to the smallest possible thing that you need, and then make those a bunch of different modules that fit together, and then you attack the modules individually.
That makes sense. Justin, what's been the hardest part while transitioning from mid to senior level? Oh, you're muted.
In terms of, I think that there is also just this mindset of mentorship, which is really important. And then as you start to get into kind of higher levels, it becomes not only your responsibility to do your own individual work, but also being a leader and helping to kind of rise the tide of your team. And so oftentimes that shift in mindset, I feel, is difficult for people. There's a book like What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I think that at various points in your career, at different thresholds, it just kind of shifts. And there is a mentality shift that's necessary from going just kind of like from a mid to a senior.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, especially as you start managing people, it kind of shifts a little bit of the perspective. I guess when you first transitioned into a more leadership role, how did you get your mindset wrapped around like that shift in responsibility share?
Yeah, so in terms of like, at least when I became a manager, that was also, I think we were talking maybe kind of like more from a mid to senior level, but like in terms of the engineering manager, that becomes very pronounced. Just because up until that point, like literally as an IC or individual contributor, largely it is kind of like your work, right? And that when you start to kind of go into kind of like engineering management, it starts to become what is the work of your team and really shifting your kind of mindset. And oftentimes what will happen is people will fall back to what's comfortable. And so they will fall back to doing it themselves and such, right? Thankfully, I had some good feedback, and I was given at the time I had an engineering manager that saw that I knew that I wanted to kind of go into engineering management and was giving me feedback about making sure that I was very cognizant about that. And it takes time because it's like I said, it's kind of just that like mental shift.
Yeah, thank you. Yemi, what has been the hardest part while transitioning from mid to senior level?
There are more responsibilities being a senior engineer, so you should participate in designs and architectural reviews. So you need to speak up and find your voice to be able to share your point of view and ideas.
That's a really great, I think, concise way to put it. Speaking up is so key in growth. Okay, so another kind of related question with regards to like your career development. I'm curious what each of you did to stand out as a senior engineer versus a mid-level engineer. So I'll pass it back to Yemi for that one.
Okay, so as a senior engineer, I was able to participate in designing a new product, sharing my experience and my knowledge. So you will need to investigate new technologies and how to improve performance of an app and learn best practices. So as a mid-level, you can show your potential to be an important part of the team, sharing your ideas and being an important part of the project.
Thank you. Brendan?
Yeah, so I think that a big part of my career progression when I made my transition to senior had to do with understanding what my org was trying to build. I think you have to look through the goal and see what everybody is trying to do, because even as a junior engineer, you are an expert in the specific part of the system that you work on. Nobody knows more about it than you do. And so it might be the case that the requirements coming down from the product people or maybe from business stakeholders, they are not informed by some information that you have access to. So the more that you can give back into that feedback loop to be in conversation with where the requirements are coming from, the more you will be taking on senior responsibilities implicitly, and people will see you as senior, in my opinion.
kind of like if you're, I guess you're positioning yourself to be perceived more senior and be trusted.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it often is the case where I don't know, and it might be specific to what I do, but if I have, so for example, you sort of straddle different areas of expertise in machine learning, software and modeling, and the modeling can be something that when you talk to a more senior software engineer, that is something that you could, I've often been able to bring some sort of experience where, hey, if we do this way now, by the way, down the line, we'll need to do something else because of some modeling constraint or whatever. And that's the sort of thing that people who might not have, they might be above you in the organization, but they might not have whatever expertise you have about the system that you're working on. And being able to flag those early is something that is really valuable. And it also lets people know that you're thinking about the big picture.
Yeah. Justin?
I think that like one of the really distinguishing factors that we, at least like at Twilio, that we look at when we're starting to look between kind of like mid and senior level is like the ability, like one, like this is a bit of kind of just a rubric here is like, is this person able to lead a team or able to be like the primary in building out a service unto themselves, right? And when we start to look at that, in kind of like the scope, like can you handle that type of complexity and such, right? It's also really important, are they building something that is maintainable and sustainable, right? It's not just about kind of like getting something to just walk and talk. This is getting something that is going to kind of be able to be operate at scale and such. So, and that comes, you kind of like mentioned this before, just this notion of mastery. And I think that that is a really important mindset to kind of have. If it becomes that like, hey, this is a checkbox and I'm just going to try to like check the boxes of like, these are the things that I'm going to get to kind of become a senior. I don't think that that is actually the right mindset to really focus on how can I be the best engineer that I can be, right? And then present yourself with opportunities when they arise. And in that way, I think is like kind of like the best way to kind of sometimes to cross that chasm if someone's getting stuck.
That makes sense. We seem to have gotten a few audience questions, which I think just as we're on the topic of kind of approaching that growth, I would love to just plug some in. So Marina said, the expectations to get promoted in junior/mid levels seem to be straightforward, but the line gets blurred to distinguish nice to have from non-negotiable skills at a senior level. How do you make sure to get straightforward feedback from your superiors on what it takes to get to that next level? Does any one of you feel strongly about answering this one?
Yeah, I think that like my advice is to one, please ensure that you are very clear with your manager about what are your career goals. I'm a big believer in vision and in intent. And if you aren't, first off, if you don't articulate to kind of like your leader or your manager, right, about kind of like what your goals are, then it's going to be very difficult to kind of maintain that. I think the other thing to do is to find a mentor or find a peer that is at that level. And to a certain extent, sometimes even just emulate that person. Like, what are the behaviors that you see of those people, right? Ideally, your manager should be able to kind of like articulate like where you are and such, right? The challenge here, like the reality is different organizations are at just different levels. And so at times there might not be clear definition of what it is to be a senior engineer. That's just, unfortunately, that just kind of is, right? So I go back to this kind of emphasis on mastery, that keep on becoming a better engineer and such, keep on taking bigger and bigger projects and keep stretching yourself. And then through this process, it's kind of like to 10,000 hours to kind of become a master, right? That I do believe that that's kind of like the way to kind of go about it.
I would also, I think that that's totally right. And I also would add that it's perfectly okay to press your manager on getting a specific rubric by which to say, what is the gulf? What is the gap between where I am now and being a senior engineer, so that I can work on it. And then you check in on one-on-ones on your progress on that, or every quarter. Because the thing is, a lot of times it's true. The definition of senior engineer is very vague. And because of that, it can encode a bunch of institutional biases that might be at your company, sexism, racism, colorism, whatever. And so it's very important. The more that you have things written down, like here's a Google document based on our last discussion on things you said I need to work on. Does this feel complete? Does this feel like the gulf? And if this is the gulf, then you meet all those things a year later. You get to bring that to your manager and say, okay, was something missing from this document? Did I not meet something here? And it adds more concreteness to what you're doing. But you can absolutely ask for those requirements explicitly.
Yeah. I would +1 to everything both Justin and Brendan said. Again, I'm not technical, so maybe I'm not the best word of wisdom, but what I have done is set up recurring meetings with my manager to make sure that, we're aligned on what that career path means, and really articulating. And like Brendan said, sometimes when there's ambiguity, biases can creep in and prevent you from really growing. So if something feels vague, just keep asking, what does that mean? What does that look like? Can you give me an example of that, to really get that concrete idea of it? Because if you can't see it, you can't be it, right? There was another question that was, I think, more driven for Justin, but speaking to Justin's wide range of experience and roles, wonder which is more beneficial for career growth in terms of skill development, breadth or depth?
That's a great question, and I think that both our approaches are completely appropriate depending on like what is your end goal. So if you, I saw another question about like architect, right, and such, right? But like for instance, at Twilio, an L6 is an architect, and L5 is what's like a principal, right? But even at that L6 level, there's also is like a senior principal. And so what is the difference between like an architect and the senior principal? Well, the architect is very broad, right? Whereas the senior principal can go very, very deep. So for instance, I have built a codec or something like that, right? Like this person is very narrow in what this person is doing, right? And they could be like world renowned within that, very deep. My personal growth has always been breadth. And I felt like that's kind of like always like how I've been. I am a jack of all trades, a master of none, right? But like, I try to be deep in various things, but I haven't gone like very extremely, I haven't built a codec, for instance, right? So but it's a very personal kind of like decision, because some people like to kind of go deep. Once again, back to like my personal preference, I feel it's a little dangerous to just be like 100% deep, because in a second that whole thing could kind of go away. But I think that like you can take anything and just, I mentioned another thing, aptitude, the ability to learn is the most important thing that you're going to have in your career, because the technology that is now is not going to be here 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. And so you just have to constantly be able to learn.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. One more question just came in regarding vision and end goal. How to identify it when you are junior or mid-level in your career? So how do you know?
I kind of like to think about, this is maybe just an exercise to do, is write your future resume. Meaning like if you were to go right now and just kind of like write out your current existing resume, imagine yourself 10 years from now writing kind of like, what would be the resume that you would like to kind of like have? And sometimes that just kind of can help solidify. And I don't think it has to be very sharp either. Like it doesn't have to be that you know exactly what you want to do, right? It could be as vague as like, I want to become a leader in such, right? And I want to kind of, and the reason I think that vision is so important is because your life is really just composed of thousands of small decisions. And if you don't have some intent about where you want to go, these kind of decisions will just be random. And then eventually you'll kind of like end up and you'll like, hey, how did I end up here? But at least if you have some sort of anchor to kind of go and say like, hey, that's the lighthouse that I want to kind of go, you're way more likely to kind of like end up in an area that you want to be than if you just are like, I'm just going to kind of not have any preference of where I want to be.
Yami or Brandon, do y'all have anything to add?
I think you can find the career you want to have in 5 years, 10 years. Like, for example, doing personal projects, doing courses. It's like learning. Always keep learning and try to find what do you to be like working, because it's like you should love what you do every day, because it could take like a lot of years like living in sadness. So for me it's that, like, if you are not sure about your current job, for example, you can try to learn new technologies, for example, and try to find your way.
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I guess I would also say, with respect to when if you're junior or mid-level or whatever, if somebody, in the same way that the only thing that qualifies you to give advice is being asked for advice, if somebody hires you for a senior position, you're a senior engineer, full stop. There's no like, actually, if you don't code in assembly, you're not a senior engineer or whatever. I saw the other day, somebody on Twitter was like, if you use your mouse at all when you're coding, I assume you're not a senior engineer. And that's just one of the more silly things I've ever heard in my entire life. So I mean, yeah, it's that simple. I mean, and then also like, if you want a job and you're excited by it, go for it. And then, hopefully you wouldn't be, if they hire you and you're in over your head, they made a bad choice, right? But if they hire you, you have to believe in yourself and just kind of let yourself sort of struggle a little bit at a level that you didn't know that you were necessarily ready for, and then grow into it. Sometimes that's the only way to.
+1 to that. I love going for roles that I'm quote unquote underqualified for, because I think that ultimately, like, a lot of roles or positions say that you must have like 10+ years to apply for something. I think particularly in senior roles. And really what you need to ask yourself is, can you do the job? And if you can apply for that job, and if they hire you, then they felt you were competent enough to do the job, and you just show up and do it. And if you need help, then you ask for help. So love it. Okay, we're gonna jump back into our other questions, but please feel free to continue asking questions in the chat if we have time at the end of this. Definitely wanna get to some audience Q&A. So, although positioning yourself strategically plays a huge role in how you develop your career, we also know that there is an element of luck or being at the right place at the right time. What role did luck play in your career? Was there a single opportunity you were afforded that helped to advance your career significantly? And I'll hand this off to Yami.
Okay, I was given the opportunity to have a well-paid job as my first job. At that moment, my only experience was participating in a research project building a search engine for medical images by keywords and content. Luckily, my practice director was working on a telecommunications company and they opened a vacancy, so he offered me the position because he liked my performance in the practice.
I love that. I think it goes back to kind of what you were saying earlier of like just kind of taking the opportunity that's there.
Yeah.
Love that. Brendan?
In my opinion, luck matters a ton when you start out in your career, and less and less as time goes on, as you build your skills, experience, and frankly, your network. I lucked into my first full-time software engineering job. I started out, like I mentioned this, I was like a psychology major, and then I graduated with a statistics degree, but not a lot of programming experience. I took a summer internship after I graduated college. And then from there, I applied for, not a joke, 150 jobs at least, a little more, I think. And my, you know, this is actually related to Matthew's question in the chat about like whether you should apply to something that says you need 2 years experience required. You know, they often do throw your resume in the trash if they feel like you don't meet their experience. But if you just try a lot, you are able to get lucky and then get that first opportunity. I lucked out because the CTO of a small startup that I applied for accidentally emailed me instead of emailing her colleague when she was saying, I don't think his background is a good fit for whatever. And I argued back for myself. Respectfully, of course. I said, actually, I beg to differ because blah, 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 blah. And I think if nothing else, I think she felt bad that I got that email. I think that's why I got the interview, but I did end up ultimately getting that job, and that totally required luck, you know? But yeah, it's certainly the next job to get was certainly half as hard, and then half as hard after that, and so on. But you know, if you're tenacious, you know, you'll stumble upon your own luck for sure at some point.
I love that story. What a wild thing to kind of get and be like, you know, there's two ways of reacting to that sort of email of like kind of feeling defeated or being like, actually, you know what? I'm going to advocate for myself and see where it goes. Because again, you got to risk it to get the biscuit. So I love that. And like you said, after the first one, it does get easier. Justin, would you like to add to this conversation?
Yeah. My father used to have a saying, and it was that that luck is really the combination of opportunity and hard work. And so I do think that there's just windows that sometimes appear, and you just need to kind of like be ready, like in those time periods, to kind of like jump through or through the door, the window, and so on and so forth, right? And I know that just even for myself, like I guess I've been in my career kind of just at startups the whole for a lot of my career, right? And the line between a startup that fails and succeeds can be a lot thinner than a lot of people kind of like consider. And I know I feel very fortunate just to be at Twilio. And like 6 years ago, it was not a sure thing. It was just kind of like, it seemed like a good idea, right? But, you know, to a certain extent, it was somewhat fortunate, right? So.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that. I think leaving it less to chance and more to like preparing for that opportunity to come by so that you can grasp at it once it comes by. I love that concept too, because I think it takes kind of like long-term faith of seeing a goal that you want to get to and then just waiting for that right time or kind of pushing towards it and then hopefully getting some luck along the way or opportunity. Cool. So could you all share some important factors that helped you advance in your role? For example, maybe that might be courses you've taken, having a mentor or sponsor, or coming across a unique opportunity. Brendan, kick us off.
Audio cut out for a second. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, sure. Could you share some important factors that helped you advance in your role? For example, maybe that might be courses you've taken, having a mentor or sponsor, or coming across a unique opportunity.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I would say there are two main things that have helped me advance. One, with respect to being in between companies when you're applying for jobs, leveraging the skill sets you have to get skill sets that you want. So I said this before, I started out angling my way into a software engineering job using my sort of, statistics background and then, getting a little lucky, right? But that wasn't the end goal. I wanted to do machine learning. So I moved from that into something that had a little more data. And then I moved from that to something more data engineering, and then ultimately to something that did do machine learning. And it's sort of like looking past this job into the next job as far as like what you are trying to do. And if you're really lucky, you can actually do that at the same company. You might have opportunities to move within your same company. And the other thing I did that I think is really helpful is practicing communication. I cannot overstate how useful it is to spend 15 minutes before sprint demos, if you're an engineer who does those, throwing up 3 slide decks that say, why are we even doing this? What did I do? And how it works. Here it is. Just so that everyone sort of gets context around what it is that you're building that might even be super important, but they'll never know if you don't tell them in a way that they can understand. And it never hurts to practice that skill as well.
Great advice. I think that also goes back to the self-advocacy, like you're positioning yourself and really like making clear the value that you add to the team. Great. Justin, what has been an opportunity or important factors that helped kind of grow your career or advance you in your role?
Yeah, +1 to all the things that Brandon kind of like stated, right? Like definitely, I think that problem solving or be able to kind of like break down oftentimes people will just kind of like feed you a solution. Hey, we need to have this button. And then it's sometimes tempting to just go off and like kind of like code the button, so on and so forth, right? But like really kind of like breaking down like, why do you need the button? Like, what are you trying to do that like makes you think you need that button, right? And being able to really distill kind of like what is the customer's need and so on and so forth, right? I think that that's really important. Communication, super important. EQ, I think is going to, as we keep on moving forward, is going to be more and more important. Are you able to kind of like read and be able to kind of like interface with your fellow peers and such in a way? Are you able to be effective and not just focus on being right? I think that that's something that is like super important, especially as you're becoming like a senior. Oftentimes people get very passionate about like, hey, this solution is the right way to do it, right? And how do you go about convincing people to and influencing people? And EQ plays a big part of that.
And someone asked what EQ is. It's emotional intelligence. So understanding how people feel about things, kind of being empathetic, that sort of thing. Yemi?
In my case, it was a combination of researching, having a mentor and sponsor, coming across a unique opportunity, and sharing knowledge. So my manager was a great mentor and sponsor. He saw my potential, so we started to discuss advancing in my professional path in Twilio. He gave me some ideas to add value to our products or improve a process. So I started to find a project to show my skills. The team built a first version of a highly requested functionality. So I decided to use that to apply a new architecture that we were trying like to see if it was the correct one for the app. So I shared this project with the team in a tech talk. So I shared the knowledge and all the result of this project. Also, I shared a beta version to try it. Excited about that, and they helped us to test it. So we were able to launch it to production.
Awesome. I love that. As your local internal comms manager, I love that communications and kind of telling the story of why something is important and the value that it adds was kind of weaved into everyone's answers. You know, communications is important sometimes. So we are almost at time. There are a couple of audience questions, but before we get to them, I just wanted to encourage everyone, if you do have questions beyond this panel, please feel free to reach out to any of the panelists here or myself if you want question or want insight as to you know, anything at Twilio or anything that was discussed here. Please feel free to reach out either through this Hopin or Hopin app direct messages, or feel free to add any one of us on LinkedIn. We've all added our LinkedIn profiles to our actual Hopin profile. I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the audience Q&A and we'll go for as long as we can. And Katrina, let me know if we have a hard stop. I do have a hard stop in 5 minutes. So Valerie Aguilar had asked, any advice on overcoming imposter syndrome and boosting confidence to get that promotion from mid-level to senior? it's something that holds me back.
Like imposter. I know. So as a manager, first off, everyone suffers from imposter syndrome. I don't know, like anyone who doesn't like hasn't gone through a situation in their life when they don't feel like, hey, I should not be in this room. Like, why am I in this room? And so on and so forth, right? So, I think it's sometimes to ground yourself and remember that there is this global common experience that this occurs, right? I think that another thing that I like to try to tell my engineers that kind of like I see are suffering from this is like going back to like life was a series of decisions that got you here right now. And so like if you have shown kind of continued demonstration that like you've kind of taken good decisions or made good judgments, right? Hopefully that can bolster your self-confidence in kind of like moving forward, that like, hey, I've made some good decisions. They got me here, right? So hopefully that can help. But yeah, just know that like this is a common thing. This is everyone experiences it.
Yeah. Brendan or Yemi, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I'll say that it's hard. Like, it definitely, one thing this isn't related so much to imposter syndrome because it's about how you feel, but you know, you'll never be able to control how other people see you. Without, I don't know, getting to what was me, it was totally fine. But when I was in college, I was the only Latino in my major, so I didn't have a lot of other people who looked like me, and I felt like it was very like maybe there's a reason for that, right? And I think it had more to do with the demographics of the school I went to than anything. But at the end of the day, one thing you don't want to do, for one thing, yes, you should just, as much as you can step into your confidence, you absolutely should. If they hired you, you're not an imposter. You are able to do it because they hired you by definition. It literally is the deal. But also what you don't want to do is become somebody who has something to prove, which is a part of my career I was in at a certain point. And I'm not proud when I look back on that time in my life, you know? You don't want to, you know, if people might commit microaggressions, especially, for example, against a female engineer or something, and explain something to you that you already know or whatever. It certainly happened to me before, right? What I find is that when I find myself more preoccupied with whether or not people perceive me as technically competent, instead of actually just stepping into my technical competence and doing my job well, I behave in ways that I myself haven't been happy with personally. So it's something where you need to be confident that if they hired you, there's a good reason, and then push back against biases you encounter, and then also just like comporting yourself with humility in any case, you know.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yemi, did you want to add anything else?
Confidence, I think, it's like, if you are there, you deserve it. So try to find, maybe sometimes you can identify aspects that you don't feel confident about it. For example, a new technology that you don't have enough experience. So keep learning, like try to find a way to improve in that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everyone, for, to all our panelists for sharing your experiences, your insights, and your knowledge. Really helpful advice, I think, in this panel. And thank you, everyone who attended in the audience. Really appreciate y'all hearing more about how to get promoted to senior engineer. And please make sure to feel free to add us on LinkedIn or go to our website at twilio.com to learn more about Twilio. Take care, y'all.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye.